What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. Jason and Joe here. It's our 1994 deep dive. Joe already revealed his top 25 albums of the year. If you haven't seen that video, go check it out. This is basically an expanded version of our old albums of the year series. We take a couple months at a time and listen to as many albums as we can. So this gives us a chance to talk about more stuff. We're expanding our top fives out to a top 25. Yeah, 1994. I think it's an okay year, but I think I already knew most of the good stuff going into it. So as far as the experience of the deep dive, I wasn't thrilled with it. I didn't come up with a whole lot of new stuff that I wasn't familiar with. So, all right, starting off my list, number 25. This is a record that Joe had on his list. It is This Perfect World by Freedy Johnston. This is his Elektra debut after 3 albums for the label Bar None. I would say I am far from a Freedy Johnson expert. This is really the only album of his that I know. But yeah, it's just got good songs, like Joe said. It's quite a lineup on it. You got Graham Maybe from Joe Jackson's band on bass, Marc Ribot, who's played on a ton of stuff, probably most famously some Tom Waits stuff, is on guitar on a couple tracks. Butch Vig's on the record. Dave Schramm, who was formerly of Yo La Tengo, is on the record. And even Marshall Crenshaw lends a 12 string to one song. So kind of like power pop elite here. And yeah, it's just good. My number 24 is The Impossible Bird by Nick Lowe. And I think Lowe has to have one of the most underrated discographies out there, especially impressive because the way he evolved as he aged, I just think is second to none almost. I can't think of anyone else who kind of underwent the transformation that he did and maintained the same level of songwriting, and maybe I think arguably improved as he went along, going from pub rock and power pop kind of stuff to something closer to resembling like a crooner, and his songwriting almost started to resemble like standards. Just really good writing, great lyrics. And I think this record, The Impossible Bird, is kind of an interesting midpoint in that evolution where you get a little bit of both sides of Nick Lowe. There's some great originals here like Beast in Me, 12-Step Program, To Quit You Babe, I Live on a Battlefield, which was co-written with Paul Carrack. But the highlight of this record for me, probably the cover of the song True Love Travels on a Gravel Road, which was made famous by Elvis Presley. And I just think his vocals on that track are outstanding. Number 23 for me is another in common with Joe. I've got There Is Nothing Wrong with Love by Built to Spill. This is their sophomore record, and it was produced by the legendary Phil Ek. And I think this is where Doug Martsch kind of finds his voice as a songwriter. The guitar work on it's not quite where they would get to or where they would go. It's a lot cleaner, a lot more clean tones on this record than the kind of more distorted stuff later on. But in a way, I think it helps the record. I think it leaves more space for the vocal melodies, and I think the melodies are great on this record. Really catchy songs. Like Joe alluded to, more influential than people realize, I think. Very clearly a huge influence on Modest Mouse. But I think it can also be heard, reverberating through records by the Shins and Ben Queller, and even Weezer, I think, borrow from this a bit. So yeah, cool record. Number 22 for me is Foolish by Superchunk, another band who I think their importance isn't celebrated nearly enough. I think very influential, a great example of DIY ethics, founding their own label in Merge, which has grown to be like the indie label. This is their 4th LP, and I think it really finds them coming into their own. Improved recording quality, better melodic ideas, and greater depth and weight to the writing, as this record follows the breakup of Mac and Lara, the two kind of like primary band members. So I guess maybe in a way this is like their Rumors, but Like a Fool, the first part, and Driveway to Driveway, I think those are all just indie rock classics. Yeah, just great stuff. Next up, my number 21 is maybe the surprise of the dive for me. I did not expect to enjoy this record by this band this much, but I have Carnival of Light by Ride. at number 21. And it's not the Ride album that you hear about much. It marked kind of a step away from the shoegaze sound that they were best known for. I think it's more of a Britpop sound. There's some psychedelic pop in there. And even members of the band have referred to it as Carnival of Shite. But I think Andy Bell has since kind of said that he's made peace with the record and now kind of likes some of the tracks. But I think at the time it felt like a betrayal and maybe fans weren't super into it. But I found it to be surprisingly melodic and just hook filled and enough of like a psychedelic swirl to it to keep it really interesting and feeling like it's got some depth to it. I think it's a little bit long, but other than that, I thought it was, yeah, surprisingly good.
All right, that's an interesting top five. I didn't listen to the Superchunk album. I didn't think I'd like that, so I skipped that. And Nick Lowe, not on my radar, but obviously the other two in common. And Carnival of Light was in my top like 35 or so. Thought it was pretty cool. Yeah, it's a good choice. Moonlight Medicine rules. Didn't quite make my list. It was vying for a low spot on there, but that's a good choice though. I like that.
All right, moving along, my number 20 is the Mavericks with What a Crying Shame. The Mavericks made my 98 list as well. I just think they're like a super solid four-star band. They've got great songs. I think Raul Malo's voice just hits that sweet spot for me, kind of like between country and pop, kind of like a Roy Orbison or Chris Isaak type of voice. You've got like 50s rock, Latin pop, country, Americana. It all comes together really seamlessly. Even I think there's even something here for like the I like everything but country people. People that don't like country should not be afraid of this. They should give it a chance. I think there's a lot to love here. Number 19 for me is a record we just talked about a bunch on the channel. It's Motorcade of Generosity by Cake. Yeah, so we've talked about this a bunch. I won't go too into it, but it's Cake's debut record. It's a little more lo-fi than the stuff that came after it, but I love the mix of styles on here. It's, unlike the Mavericks who kind of seamlessly blend all of their influences together, this is like contradicting things butting up against one another, and it's kind of makes for interesting results. Plus, you've got Greg Brown's incredible guitar work. He's the MVP of the record, and it's just super unique sound and super unique songwriting. Number 18 for me is a record that's dropped a bit for me. I had it at 4.5 stars. I've actually dropped it down to 4. But I think it's still really cool and one of this band's better records, and that is Amorica by the Black Crowes. I still think it's one of the band's finest hours. It's my second favorite Black Crowes record. And this is the record where I think they really stretch out and expand their sound a bit. Rather than heavily borrowing from a handful of bands like the Faces and the Stones and Aerosmith, I think here they're kind of taking in almost like the entirety of the 70s into their sound. There's some soul, there's some country, southern rock, blues. And I think the production's a little bit more interesting as well. I wouldn't call it like an experimental record by any means, but it's a little less meat and potatoes rock and roll approach. The way some things are panned and treated and EQ'd, it's just a little more interesting. It was produced by Jack Joseph Puig. So yeah, I like that one a good bit, but not as much as I did during the deep dive of the Black Crowes. Or maybe it's just the thing of like, comparatively to their catalog, I was high on it then, but now listening to it in context of the year, just a little lower. Still great though. My next number 17 is a record that I saw absolutely nobody talk about during the deep dive. It is Heaven and Hull by Mick Ronson. This is Mick's final studio album. Mick, of course, died of cancer in 1993, making this a posthumous release. And as a result, some friends of his had to step in and finish the record for him. So a bunch of guest vocal spots on this from everyone from Bowie to Joe Elliott to Chrissie Hynde, John Cougar Mellencamp, Ian Hunter. And I think there's some great original tunes here. There's some covers. And I think for all of the hands involved in finishing it up, it comes out extremely cohesive. I think it really works as an album, except for the version of All the Young Dudes that's like just tacked on to the end. It's taken from the Freddie Mercury tribute concert for some reason. It's not even, studio. It's just slapped on there. So aside from that, like kind of literal piece of filler, I think it's really cohesive, a good record. And Mick's playing is killer on it. That's some of his best playing of his career, I think. Just really underrated record. No one ever talks about it, but yeah, I think it's really good. And I think all three of his solo records are great. Number 16 is a record that I have been up and down on, back and forth throughout my life in terms of my thoughts on it. But it's The Division Bell by Pink Floyd. Um, I used to love it. It was probably my favorite Pink Floyd album when I was in high school. And then my opinion kind of came down to earth on it a bit. But I don't know. I've kind of been getting higher and higher on it again lately. I think it's really underrated, possibly the peak of Gilmour as a vocalist. I think his voice sounds incredible on it. Excellent guitar work from him as well. Bob Ezrin's production, I think, is a touch dated, but it's still like really big and full and spacious sounding. It's got that kind of ambiance to it that you want from a Pink Floyd record. Richard Wright is back in the band as a full-time member on this after only being listed as additional personnel on Momentary Lapse of Reason. He even sings Wearing the Inside Out. So yeah, it feels more like Floyd again, even though, Roger Waters still isn't there. But yeah, just a great track list top to bottom. I think all the songs are really good. The playing is great.
Yeah, five more good ones. I didn't hear Mavericks. What a crying shame. Motorcade Generosity, probably better than I gave it credit for. I was just sick of cake. Amorica was my number 27, and it was on my top 25 for almost the entire deep dive, and then it kind of slid off at the very end. But it's still fine album. Surprised at the Division Bell. That's probably the most surprising thing. You're not really known as a Pink Floyd fan in general, and that didn't make my list. I still have it at 4 stars. I think it's cool, but not quite up to the usual standards. And Heaven and Hall, never heard of it. Didn't know of its existence. I guess I didn't deep dive the year that much.
Uh,
Nobody told me. The problem is you never tell me your picks, and no one else in the Discord is going to have Nick Lowe and Mick Ronson on their list. So these albums weren't even on my, sprawling spreadsheet of possibilities.
yeah, I gotta try to keep mine to myself. Number 15 is Whiskey for the Holy Ghost by Mark Lanigan. I bought this CD. I don't know what year it was. It probably wasn't in 94, probably a couple years after that. And I was not into it. And I kept it on the shelf for a long, long time. And I don't know when exactly it was that I pulled it off and listened to it again, but probably 5, 6, 7 years later, I put it on and absolutely loved it. Yeah, Mark's voice, of course, is the star of the show. And I think it's at its most haunting and beautiful here. There's kind of like a Tom Waitian darkness to the record, which generally I'm not a fan of things that are that kind of like dark, morose. But Lanigan has this ability to kind of like soar over the darkness of the music, and I think he's got great melodies, and the way he sings kind of brightens it up a bit. This record's produced by Mike Johnson of Dinosaur Jr. He produced and played a bunch of stuff on it. Ton of really cool drummers on it. Tad Doyle from the band Tad, Dan Peters from Mudhoney, Mark Pickerel from Screaming Trees, and Jay Mascis plays drums on some of it as well. So yeah, pretty cool record. Number 14, I've got Rotting Pinata by Sponge. I think Sponge were pretty underrated. They were kind of doing a similar thing to STP, where there was kind of like post-grunge hard rock imbued with like a pinch of psychedelia and a little bit of glam as well. Vinny Dombrowski, the singer, I think has a really cool voice and a really unique vocal delivery. I highly recommend all of their first three records. This one was released in August of 94, but it was a slow burn. It wasn't actually charting until February of 95. Partially, I would say, because the lead single was a song called Nina Menasha, which is a strange choice of single when you've got Plowed and Molly on there as well. So it wasn't until the second and third singles that the record kind of hit. Yeah, but to me, those two singles, Plowed and Molly, will always be like essential 90s alt rock anthems. You've also got other great stuff on here like Drownin' and Rainin', both excellent. Pennywheels is a great opener, so a lot of cool stuff. Yeah, they don't get their due. Number 13, I've got Teenager of the Year by Frank Black. This is Frank's second solo album, essentially a double album, 22 tracks. I don't know. Frank Black to me is just like always good. This feels like it picks up right where the Pixies left off. These songs are just like energized and urgent. I think his writing is as interesting as ever. The songs have great hooks. Lyle Workman is a fantastic guitar player. His guitar works great on here. You also get a few appearances from Joey Santiago of Pixies on there as well. Morris Tepper. Yeah, he's just like there's certain people I come across that just seem to think that Surfer Rosa, Doolittle, maybe to a lesser extent the rest of the original run of the Pixies is just like vastly superior. But to me, he just like kept it going. I think these are almost as good as those classic records. I think when the Pixies got back together, I love Indy Cindy. I think it's great. I don't think he's ever really had a major misstep. But people disagree with that. But okay, number 12, going anti-Joe Core for this one. It's Crooked Rain by Pavement. A lot of slanted and enchanted lovers out there won't like what I have to say, but I think Crooked Rain is better in nearly every way to their debut record to me. I think Steve West is just a much better drummer than Gary Young, and he comes in and everything tightens up. The production's better, the songwriting's better, the hooks are stronger. I think when you listen to Pavement's full discography in like a deep dive situation, like I did several years ago with Kramzer, you have like a certain appreciation for all of them, and comparatively, you can look at them and say, well, I don't like Crooked Rain as much as this other record. But I think when you listen to it in context of a year like 1994, you realize just like how different they were to everything else going on. I don't think too much is really on the same level. Arguably, maybe Built to Spill, but as far as like inventing indie, this is almost as close as you can get. I mean, indie takes elements from things dating way back. I mean, you could say Marquee Moon is like the starting of of indie. You can trace it as far back as you want to go, and it pulls from all different places. But at least as far as what I think of as indie music, this is like one of the first places where it's completely coalesced and existing in its current form. All right, last one before the top 10, getting back to some agreement with Joe. I've got Throwing Copper by Live. I was a huge Live fan back in the day. I think they had something a little different from all the other huge rock bands and all the other big rock records of 1994. I think they were like simultaneously more mysterious and also somehow more relatable. They were kind of like writing about these religious themes, and everything was kind of over the top and overblown and dramatic, like you said, but they're also just like these dudes from York, Pennsylvania. So I think there's kind of a dichotomy in that makes them kind of interesting. Also, probably what made a lot of people dislike them is that the over the topness felt disingenuous or something. But I don't know. For me, it always worked. I think Jerry Harrison's production is just right too, and a lot more straightforward than you would maybe expect from a Talking Head production. But yeah, I think he nailed the sound of it. I think it sounds great, and the hits are all great and really good. But I think the deep cuts are where the record really shines. Stuff like Stage and Waitress, and especially Pillar of Davidson, which is so good. One of my favorite songs of the entire 90s, I think. Throwing Copper's great. I was kind of like teetering back and forth between 4.5 and 4, and I think I'm back up to 4.5 on it after dropping it down. So this is my first 4.5. Everything below it was 4 stars.
All right, it's more albums I just didn't listen to for whatever reason. Like I really like Mark Lanigan, but I forgot to listen to Whiskey for the Holy Ghost. I really like Sponge's next album, but I forgot to listen to Running Pinata. Teenager of the Year I liked, a little too long. I think it's like 40th on my list or something, 45th. Crooked Rain, Stephen Malkmus makes me want to puke. So obviously it's in my bottom 5. Obviously I love Throwing Copper, so that was a good pick.
All right, top 10 time. My number 10 is everywhere you look online says it's an album from 1995, but it is not. It came out on a smaller label or independently or something in 94. Then they got signed to a bigger label and it was re-released in 95. But that record is Born to Quit by Smoking Popes. I found this record through several appearances of theirs on soundtracks, specifically the Angus soundtrack and the Clueless soundtrack, which are two of my favorite soundtracks ever. And I don't know, they're a really unique band. I think hardly ever talked about, but I think if you look them up online, generally they're considered like pop punk, and that's kind of the world they ran in. They played Warped Tour and stuff like that. But their singer, Josh Caterer, has just the most incredible voice and melodic sensibility that almost completely removes them from that genre, in my opinion. I mean, you can listen to the guitars and go, yeah, this is basically pop punk, but what he is singing on top of it is definitely not what any other pop punk singer would do. His melodies to me are straight up Morrissey, and his vocals are kind of strangely like androgynous. I remember listening to them back in the day and being like, is this a woman with a really weird deep voice? Like what is this? And yeah, just really interesting songs, really heartfelt. Mrs. You and Me, fantastic song. Need You Around is incredible. Gotta Know Right Now is great. Just great songwriting. Pop punk maybe, but uh, kind of like the Mavericks. If you don't like country, I think you'll still like the Mavericks. If you don't like pop punk, I think you'll still like Smoking Popes. Number 9, I've got Vitalogy by Pearl Jam. This was in my top 5, so this has slipped a little bit, but not because I like it less than I did, but because I've like other things a bit more this time around. Yeah, this is their third record. It finds Eddie taking more control of the band. This is kind of the first one with him fully at the reins, and I think as a result, there's more of a punk sound coming in. That was always there, but much more prominent now. It's a little bit of a darker record. It's a little bit uncomfortable. They're kind of pushing back against their own fame a little bit here, and I think it makes for a pretty compelling album. And the fact that they were able to do that and successfully do that, I think, push back against their own stardom, but also still like find a way to have hits and still have success on radio and not completely alienate their fans, I think is something. I think they walked that line perfectly of kind of having integrity and doing what they wanted to do, but also doing it in a way that appealed to their core audience. Number 8 is Purple by STP, which I think is a big step up from core, more of their own identity and sound coming through here. Eric Kretz, Dean DeLeo, and Robert DeLeo, I think, are all just completely on top of their game as players on this record. And, listening to this now, like you said, it's absurd that they were viewed as knockoff grunge band, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, whoever people thought they were ripping off. They're so different from those bands. It's just insane. And I haven't heard this in a few years, probably since we did the deep dive, which was probably 2020 or 2021, probably 2020. And yeah, just it kicks ass. Still Remains is so good. The bass on that, the Zeppelin-esque chords, Scott singing in a higher register, definitely not sounding like Eddie Vedder. And it's another album with just killer deep cuts. I mean, the hits are great, but every song is up to the standard of the hits, I think. All right, my number 7 is John Henry by They Might Be Giants. The beginning of my They Might Be Giants love was the song Send Surround from the Power Rangers soundtrack. So because of that song, I ordered John Henry from Columbia House or something. I remember getting it in the mail. So I loved it from first listen. The mix of humor and like the legit pop songcraft really struck a chord with me. And I also liked the fact that the humor wasn't necessarily jokey. It was just kind of them being weird. So that always intrigued me. And it feels very much like an album that I should like less and less as I get older. But every few years I put it on, and every few years I think, oh, this is the time I'm not going to like John Henry anymore. And every time I like it more. The ability for them to pivot from like truly bizarre stuff like Oh, Do Not Forsake Me and then also have just like a straight up pop song as brilliant as End of the Tour. And for them to go back and forth and just glide from idea to idea, I just so impressive. This is also the first record of theirs where they kind of had a full band set up. You've got another Graham Maybe appearance. He plays on No One Knows My Plan and A Self Called Nowhere. You got two incredible Robert Quinn guitar solos on Sleeping in the Flowers. And he's also on No One Knows My Plan. The fact that this was a full band and it was my first exposure to them kind of set me up for disappointment going backwards through their catalog. And it took me a while to really adjust and appreciate those earlier records. But and even though I do appreciate and love some of those records now, to me, this is still like my preferred version of They Might Be Giants. This kind of mid 90s era John Henry Factory Showroom. That's the peak for me. So yeah, John Henry, love it a lot. Number 6, I'm going with a record that was also in my top 5 before, has just slightly fallen out. I've got Without a Sound by Dinosaur Jr. Huge fan of Dinosaur Jr. Anyone that watches our channel should know that. And my favorite era of Dinosaur Jr. is the 90s. I think their 90s stuff is super underrated and their 80s stuff gets all the attention. But this is my least favorite of their 4 90s studio albums. I think it's maybe a touch too polished. Yeah, Feel the Pain, probably the closest thing they ever had to a hit. This is kind of like their MTV album. This was, I think, their stab at, breaking through. And so for me, the production, just a little too clean. That said, I think the songwriting is phenomenal. I think it has a ton of heart. I think the lyrics are legitimately heart-wrenching. Songs like I Don't Think So and Yeah, Right, Mind Glow and Over Your Shoulder, just incredible writing. I think this record is the closest Jay ever got to the ear bleeding country moniker that he liked to ascribe to the band. So yeah, I love it a lot, but it's sandwiched between like 2 of my favorite records ever in their catalog. So it's just a little dip for them, but for most bands, this would be the best thing they ever did.
All right, I didn't hear that Smoking Popes album. I don't think I'm aware of their existence, but that sounded pretty cool. I don't really like They Might Be Giants. I don't know if I ever will, but I should probably at least listen to something else. I just don't like Flood, the production. Yeah. So maybe I'll take a shot at John Henry. Without a Sound, I liked a lot. That was just bubbling under the top 25 Purple Vitology on my list. So it's shaping up to being no real Britpop, one grunge album, and then a top 5 other than, God, who's on here? Jeff Buckley's got to be one. Maybe Tom Petty. And I don't even know. I don't remember your top 5 from the original. Meat Puppets, maybe? Bush? Merciful Fate? I don't know. TLC? TLC appearance, right?
No
Or
Bush.
but have you become a giant trip hop fan and we're getting Portishead and Massive Attack in top 5?
No.
I think that would really please the members of the Patreon.
My number 5 is a record that I really love. I've mentioned it passingly a couple times on the channel. I almost picked it for album of the week, but I knew I was going to be talking about it in 94, so I saved it. It is the record Light Music for Dying People by the band Sordid Humor. They are a Bay Area band, and this is their only full-length album, and they broke up before it came out. So not super well known. They're best known probably for their association with Counting Crows. Adam Duritz sings backup on several tracks on this record. They also, Counting Crows, take Sordid Humor songs all the time. Like a lot of when Adam's singing live, maybe in the middle of Round Here or whatever, and he starts seemingly improvising or just going off the rails, singing whatever he wants. Often what that is lyrics from Sordid Humor songs that he's injecting into the Counting Crows catalog. But this does not sound like Counting Crows. I think maybe the best comparison would be like Monster era REM with a much different sounding singer. I just think these songs are amazingly melodic, really catchy. The lyrics are strange, kind of surreal. No clue what any of the lyrics are about, but they're interesting. Yeah, just song after song of just super good hooks, kind of jangly, kind of rockin', hard to describe, but check it out. I think most people that watch this channel will enjoy it. Yes, you did guess one of my new top 5 entries. It is Too High to Die by Meat Puppets at number 4. This is one of those instances of a band kind of slipping into the mainstream for a second and their fans not really digging it as much as the early stuff, but managing to hit the sweet spot for me. The cleaner production, I think, goes a long way in making their songs just kind of pop, and I think the vocals sound fantastic on this record, and there's great guitar work. The solo on Never Been Found is so good. I don't really think they lose that much. There's some discussion on the Discord about this record, some people feeling like they lost the magic on this, and I don't see it. I just think the songs are so good. It sounds really good. Stuff like Severed Goddess Hand is just so delightfully weird. Like, it's not like they became Pearl Jam or something. They sound very much like the Meat Puppets still. Station is kind of like this quirky little ditty. We Don't Exist is just like all downhill momentum, just flying through that backwater, just rocks incredibly hard. I think it's great. Another one like the Sponge songs that I think is just like a 90s anthem when I think of 90s rock. That's one of my go-tos. So I think every song on it's great. I think it's still really unique, even though it sounds a little bit more produced, and it is definitely my favorite Meat Puppets record. Number 3 is where we step up to 5 stars. And my first 5-star record is Wildflowers by Tom Petty. So Rick Rubin's Guide to Producing a Great Record. Number 1, work with Tom Petty. I think that's all he's ever come up with for his list. Yeah, I bought this in 1994. I knew some of Petty's hits at that point, probably most of the big ones, but I didn't know his whole catalog, and I don't think I understood at the time what a reinvention and retooling this kind of was for him. It's 15 tracks. It's pretty long, and I think every track is great. I think I probably heard all 15 tracks on the radio at some point. Pittsburgh radio loved this record. I think DVE was playing some deep cuts. Yeah, it was huge. And like John Henry, it's kind of a record that I've rediscovered multiple times throughout the years. I got super into it my first year out of high school, like 2003. I was listening to it a ton, and just every couple years I go back to it, and I'm always struck by just how good the writing is. Just bulletproof songs on here, I think. And aside from the writing being great, there's just like this magical something to the sonic quality of the record. It kind of sparkles in a way that almost indescribable. I don't know. It's got like a je ne sais quoi that no other Tom Petty recordings have. And I hate to give Rick Rubin any credit for that, so I won't. Okay, number 2 is Weezer's Blue Album. And this one I got in 1995. I got it for my 11th birthday, so early 95. And even at that age, it felt like a shift in the landscape to me. It wasn't as self-serious as all the other bands coming out, and they kind of were more fun and playful, but also some like real emotional depth to their songs as well. Songs like The World Has Turned and Left Me Here. So that's kind of like a pretty heavy statement, and the melodies were full of feeling, and I think Ocasek's production is great on it. You can hear some of that Cars influence coming through, I think, on tracks, and yeah, I mean, you listen to a record when you're 11 years old a million times, and it's gonna stick with you, I think. And this one is pretty much as deeply ingrained into my musical DNA as anything. So it's amazing. Number 1 is Grace. It's not changing. It was my number 1 before. For some reason, I thought it was your number 1 as well. I thought we had a trifecta.
No, no, nothing's changed. That was Cramsey's number 1, and I broke it with Park Life.
Grace, I first heard about on some VH1 show in the late 90s, probably, where they had like celebrity panel talking about like top fives. And someone picked this for some category, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't really listen to it until a few years later when I had streaming and could do so without buying it. So I think I really got into this in about 2003 or four, and it just blew me away. I listened to it constantly. Like you said, every song is good. I think there's a good balance between the heavier rock stuff and the gentler, quiet stuff. The band is incredible. I don't think they get talked about enough. The playing across the board, the drumming, the bass playing is so good. Production's amazing. Andy Wallace, just a all-time great engineer. His singing is, I mean, he has an amazing voice, but he not only has an amazing voice, but he knows how to use it effectively. He's not only belting high notes. I think he is understanding of, emotional depth and weight and how to connect with a listener in ways that are far beyond his years on this record. I think he was deeply knowledgeable about a lot of different stuff, and his choice of covers sort of display that, doing Nina Simone, Lilac Wine, and Leonard Cohen, just a master. It's a shame that this is his only true finished full-length album in his life. I think he could have been, one of the all-time greats.
Okay, yeah, good top three, all in common there. Haven't heard Sorted People. That's one of those Jason just out of nowhere picks.
Sordid humor.
What is it? Sorted Humor?
Sordid humor.
Sorted Humor, light music for dying people. I've never heard any of those words strung together. Too High to Die, I liked more than I thought I would. Another 4-star. I'm getting a little bit in the alternative this year, but you really just lay it on thick with your alt rock and indie rock here.
I tried to get outside of that, and I didn't like any of it that much. I'm really not a trip hop fan. I tried some of the big trip hop records, and they were all like 2-star territory for me. I tried some like R&B stuff, and
Tough
yeah,
year for
it was tough. But yeah, a good year for rock, I guess. All right, let us know what you think of my list. Go back and watch Joe's if you haven't seen it yet. Leave your own list in the comments, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Check back for our top 25 songs, which we will be doing together in one video. So thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.